Well, guys, Christmas is almost upon us. Today's the 22nd, and I want to wish you all the best. A Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. I say this because this is actually my last podcast of 2022. It's not to say that the podcast is shutting down for the year. This will be my last podcast, and tomorrow, Friday, is a holiday. It's a Salem holiday. The podcast will pick up on Tuesday, which is December 27th. Danielle, my daughter, will be sitting in for me for the duration, and I will be back on January 3rd. Isn't that right, honey? January 3rd, I will be back in the saddle, and it's going to be great. In fact, Debbie and I are heading to New York. We'll talk a little bit about that when Debbie comes on after my opening segment. I thought I'd speak about the uniqueness of Christianity, a topic I've had to think about from a young age because, of course, I grew up in a society that wasn't predominantly Christian. If you grow up in a society that's Christian, you're taught Christian doctrine and you go, well, this is how it is. But when you grow up in a society in which the Hindus are the majority, the number two group is the Muslims, and there are a number of other religious groups, the Jains, the Sikhs, the Buddhists, and so on. It makes you think about what are the ideas that these different religions have in common, but also what are the ideas that make Christianity different. Now, I spoke about this recently. In fact, when Debbie and I were in Israel, I gave a talk on the Sea of Galilee. I'm jokingly calling it my Sea of Galilee talk. And by the way, I got an audio of it yesterday, and I put it up inside my Locals channel for subscribers. This is part of the exclusive content I sometimes do just for my local subscribers. So if you're a local subscriber, please listen to it. Dinesh.locals.com, by the way, is the site to check it out. And if you're not, do consider joining me on Locals. I'm also able on that platform to talk about stuff I sometimes can't address because of the censorship on places like YouTube and Facebook. Now, Christianity has in common with other religions a belief in God. It has in common with other religions a belief in the afterlife and the idea that this life is not the only life. The profound idea that there is a sort of world behind the world or a world beyond the world, what is sometimes called transcendence. That is not a unique preserve of Christianity. In fact, it's not even a unique preserve of religion. We find even in the philosophers of ancient Greece, like Socrates, the belief in transcendence, obviously a transcendence that differs from traditional theistic belief. But what makes Christianity unique? I put it this way, and I tried to put it this way as part of my Sea of Galilee talk, that we can begin with something that everyone would agree with. Things are not the way they ought to be in the world. And so right away, we're saying that things in the world operate on two levels. There's a kind of baseline level of the way things are. That's the ground level. And then there's the top level of the way things ought to be. That's the higher line. And that is absolute truth, absolute beauty, absolute perfection, absolute goodness, and so on. So you have a chasm. You have a large gap between the way things are and the way things ought to be. And how do you close? How do you shrink? How do you traverse this great chasm? Well, if you think about the religions of the world, most of them, virtually all of them, are based upon some set of codes and commandments, rules. I think most prominently of Judaism, with not only its 10 commandments, but its 600 plus rules. A elaborate regimen of do's and don'ts, and that include diet and what to do when you're menstruating and what you should put on your head. And so rules that go beyond obey your father and mother or thou shalt not kill, an elaborate regimen of rules. And in Islam, the same thing, lots of rules. So you can think of religions as putting up a ladder. It's a ladder that attempts to cross the distance from the way things are down here to the way things ought to be up there. And human beings are urged to kind of make this trek, and some may get further than others, and no one may get all the way, but then you rely on the mercy of God to kind of overlook the fact that you haven't been able to fully cross the boundary, but at least you tried, you made a valiant attempt. And interestingly, Christianity rejects this. Why? Not because it's not good to follow rules. Christianity, in fact, incorporates a number, although not all, of the Jewish rules. But the Christian idea is that the chasm between the human level down here and the divine level is impassable. It cannot be crossed. Yeah, some people may get to rung number 5 as opposed to rung number 3, but that difference doesn't matter all that much. Why? Because you're still a long, long way away from the divine level. If that boundary is going to be crossed, it has to be crossed from the other side. God has to descend, or you may say condescend, down to the human level. And this is really the message. This is the role of Jesus. Jesus is God's ambassador, if you will, that God, a part of God. God sends down to earth to become a man, to take on, if you will, to cross this otherwise terrifying boundary. And this is really what makes Christianity unique. The initiative comes from God, and our job is basically to say yes. Our job is not necessarily to atone for all our sins, because how can we? But rather to acknowledge that we are sinners and accept the substitutionary atonement, the saving grace, if you will, of Christ. This is not an attempt to prove that Christianity is right or true or even good. It's merely an attempt to italicize, to identify the way that Christianity is unique, the way in which it's different. And I thought it would be important to do that this Christmas season.